Hello. If you've come to this video thinking I'm going to be talking about Spike Lee's wonderful film, which I do recommend if you haven't seen it, I'm sorry if you're going to be disappointed. It might actually be a double disappointment once I tell you what I am going to be talking about, because it's something we don't often refer to in international school leadership seminars, and that's the question of morality in our decision making. I think it's a pity that we tend to ignore this because we talk a lot about ethics, and we want our schools to be run ethically. We want to adhere to codes of professional ethics, but we don't often investigate and explore the moral principles that underpin the ethical codes that we utilize and refer to. I think it's fair to say that we all want to do the right things. But what do we mean by the right things, and how do we know if we're doing the right things? Well, I think the answer to that is that we use a moral compass. We've all got moral compasses. We might have several moral compasses to which we can refer. And in fact, in this video, which is the first of two videos, I'm going to be talking about 4 moral compasses. I think they're pretty much the only 4 compasses you might encounter, although I will mention a 5th, which I hope you don't encounter too often. The first of these is an ideological compass. By ideology, I mean it's something that tells us what the ultimate purpose of schooling and education is. And on the basis of this, we design a school which guides us towards that kind of operation. Now, we don't agree on purposes. We don't agree on whether the focus of education should be the child and creating free-thinking individuals with critical skills to form their own judgments, or whether we want to socialize them into existing cultures, or perhaps train them to get great jobs in the future in a highly technological workplace where they can not only get wealthy themselves, but maybe generate wealth for the societies in which they live. In fact, is school for the children, or is it for the society? And is it for national society, or is it for global society? Should we be forming global citizens whose perspective on life is not that of a single identity, a single nation, a single belief system, but a global one in which they can actually interculturally interact with others and appreciate the diversity of visions and views across the world? I'm not saying in this particular session that one ideology is better than another ideology. I'm just stating that there are ideological beliefs that spur you to particular forms of action. And I'm going to call that the ideological compass. And I'm going to put it onto a geographical compass to show you a little bit about where it might go. I'm going to place it in a fairly neutral position. I'm not going to prioritize it above others, although we'll see later on if there is a priority. The second moral compass that we all operate in is the compass of normative values, normative codes, because we are all subject to a normative compass depending on the nation state in which we live and the community in which we operate. All nations expect some things of school leaders. At the minimum level, it might simply be about school safety and health in the school buildings we operate. It might involve procedures for child protection. In more intrusive systems, it might indicate to us what we can teach, what we can't teach, how we should teach, how we shouldn't teach, topics we can refer to, topics we can't refer to. We can also set normative systems for ourselves. If we decide the school is going to be accredited, then it could be that the accreditation agency has standards of its own. And if you hear somebody say, we're going to do this because the accreditation inspectors will see it in the school when they come to visit us, then it means they're actually devolving some decision-making to the external agency, the accreditation body itself. The IB, International Baccalaureate, makes extensive normative demands on schools to fulfill criteria to become part of the IB community. So there's a normative framework as well as an ideological framework in which we exist, and that means we've got a normative compass that can tell us if we're doing the right thing. Let's put it onto the geographical compass to see where that might go. The third compass to which we can refer, I'm going to call the institutional compass. And you might actually be contracted to do this, because if you're a school leader, your contract implicitly expects you to do the best for your school, to prioritize, in other words, the school's interests. And the school's interests don't necessarily coincide with individual students. They might, for instance, focus on quantitative aspects. They might want full enrollment. They might want high examination results. They might want to exclude certain kinds of minority groups' needs because they're expensive to fulfill, and the school balance sheet also needs to be taken care of. We need to have a good reserve for capital investments in the future. We want the school to be healthy, and I think there's nothing wrong with this. This is part of our professional role, to leave behind us healthy schools when we move on from our position. So we can also feel institutional pressures, and I'm going to call that the institutional compass. I like that to the geographical compass. The fourth kind of compass is a little bit different. It's been encroaching more recently on the international school system, and it's the interests of shareholders or investors. I'm going to call this the investor compass because it does have a morality of its own. In fact, in business, it's the responsibility of the CEO to optimize profitability for shareholders and investors in the company. That guarantees further investors, it guarantees sustainability for the business as an operation in the future. It doesn't necessarily mean you don't take care of other needs, because in the somewhat utopian perception of an ideal capitalist enterprise, the clients will be happy, you will fulfill the normative expectations of the government, and you will run a healthy business with a good balance sheet, and the institution will be healthy and the employees happy. That does sound a bit utopian, of course, but it's not impossible for some heads, especially if they have extensive liaison and interaction with board members, with investors and owners, to actually see this morality being expressed, and they can actually take aspects on board. It can be quite attractive, for instance, to use the jargon of investors and feel part of a kind of a jet set. I'm not saying that that is necessarily why heads do sometimes align themselves with this perspective, but I can see that there's a certain attraction in joining the kind of elite club of investor mentality. So I'm going to consider that as a legitimate moral compass, which might influence decision making. So let's put that on a little bit as well. Now, here are the four compasses that I can actually see expressed, and I haven't given any priority to them yet in terms of one above the other or in terms of importance. In the professional life of a school leader, you have to balance all four. You have to make sure that you put in your ideological expectations, hopefully in line with the school's philosophy and vision, but that's something you will want to do while you take care of the practicalities of running a good school as an institution and complying with the norms of the local government. So we actually enjoy that. If we're honest, this is something that most heads actually enjoy. It's an intellectual challenge. It's a professional challenge. It's an exciting challenge. It brings together staff in teamwork to actually project models forward into the future, saying how can we optimize the use of our limited resources to get the results we would like to see, and at the same time keep all of our stakeholders, and I mean stakeholders now, not shareholders, happy. It can be problematic as well, because in times when there is conflict between these dynamics, they are in a dynamic phase of constant stimuli and pressure between each other, there are times when leaders might feel that they're unable to push their agenda of ideology forwards because there is an expectation on them to take action that they feel is inappropriate. And I think that can lead to incredible stress and angst, much more so than making a technical error or a strategic mistake that sets you back a year or two in your planning for a successful school growth project. If you make a decision which you think is morally inappropriate, it can be very difficult for you to live with. And I think that might be one of the reasons why some heads, or why headship in general in international schools, has a fairly short tenure, because I don't think we're transparent enough as a communities and as heads and boards and owners and shareholders in actually looking at the morality of the people we work with and understanding their perspectives, not just from a technical point of view, but from a moral point of view. I did mention there was a fifth component, a fifth compass, but I'm only going to mention that as an aside because the fifth compass is your self-interest. You might actually be taking decisions not because you believe in the educational value of them or because of the institutional needs, just because you feel that they will serve your own purposes in career advancement or whatever, remuneration. So let's put that aside for the moment and imagine that we do want the best somehow for the schools we operate and the families and the children that we are working with. But there's an issue here because morality is about doing the right thing, which means there are wrong things to do. And just as you can actually do the right thing, you can do the wrong things. And so what I want to move on to in the second session that I'll be putting on the internet shortly is to ask what this model tells us about international schools and what kind of ideologies should international school leaders be working with and which ones shall they try to avoid? Which compasses, in other words, are the right compasses and which ones are the wrong compasses for us to use? I hope you found this useful and that you can identify with some of the things I've been saying. I'd be interested in knowing whether you agree with what I've said and whether you think there are other compasses or whether this whole business of the morality is something that you don't have time to think about because you're too caught up in the practicalities of running a school. But I'll put a link up now to take you to a more extensive publication that I've written about this. And I would be interested in hearing back from you either through the Alliance website or through LinkedIn. So I hope to see you again for a second session before too long, and thank you for listening.